Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're discussing what happened on November 25th, 1783, the British evacuation of New York City, leading to the real end of the Revolutionary War and the triumphant return of George Washington and the Continental Army to the city they had lost 7 years earlier. Yes, New York City had been occupied by the British and was acting as their headquarters for 7 years to this point. But it wasn't so easy to just walk in. You see, first of all, the British had to leave, the evacuation itself. But this took several months. It started the previous August, and Sir Guy Carleton, who was in charge of what was left of the British Army in North America, well, he had to evacuate the refugees. Problem is, there were loyalists throughout the American colonies who were flocking to New York City to be rescued, for lack of a better term. About 29,000 people had to be exported from New York City to different parts of the world, really, Nova Scotia, the Caribbean, London, other places around the world where they would feel secure now that their homes, and what most of them knew as their homes their entire lives, were gone. Additionally, there were about 3,000 black loyalists who had joined the British Army in an attempt to fight in exchange for their freedom. Now, the Treaty of Paris actually said that these people should be returned to slavery. All property should be returned, right? Not if you're Guy Carleton. He would have none of that. Additionally, the Treaty of Paris hadn't officially been ratified quite yet, so there was that little bit of a blurry line. And Guy Carleton could not in good conscience send these people who fought for the British Army and for their freedom back into slavery. So he did what he thought was right, and he sent them to other parts of the globe to be free for all intents and purposes, though different people met different endings wherever they ended up. That's not the concern of Guy Carleton. He was trying to help. That being said, finally, on November 25th, the British were off Manhattan Island. They were still on Staten Island and a few other exterior islands waiting to officially debark. But before George Washington could arrive, the flags had to be changed. They had to take down those British flags and put up American flags. So Henry Knox, of all people, leads a contingent into now abandoned New York City and starts taking down the flags. Unfortunately, one flag on the highest flagpole, well, it was not only nailed into the pole, but the British greased it to make it nearly impossible to climb up and change the flags. While this is objectively hilarious, it took the Americans quite some time to get it down. It wasn't until a gentleman named, John Van Arsdale was able to, with the help of some cleats and a ladder, finally get up there and remove the flag, putting up the American flag, allowing the Americans and the Continental Army to finally retake New York City. And this they do. They come down across the island of Manhattan. Of course, New York City itself was really just the southern tip of Manhattan at this point. And when they get there, George Washington, alongside Governor George Clinton, who had been governor in absentia for 7 years, they parade together down Broadway, finally saying, "We did it, the war is over." Now, they had a toast that night. There were like 13 toasts to a whole bunch of different things, which, when I was looking to it, interestingly, Sweden was one of the, it was France, and then the Netherlands, and then Sweden in that order, which expect more content about Sweden's participation in the American Revolution coming up. That aside, they have these toasts, and then they go on to go home. Now, George Washington's work was not done. He had to have several public meetings with people who would help the Patriots clandestinely. Most notably, perhaps, is Hercules Mulligan, a Patriot spy who everyone thought was a British tailor at this point. So Washington publicly dined with Mulligan to demonstrate to everyone, no, this guy was on our side the whole time, and very helpful, mind you. Washington only hangs around New York for about 8 days until December 4th, because New York was occupied for 7 years. George Washington had been commander-in-chief of the Continental Army for 8.5 years. To put that in context, think about what you were doing 8.5 years ago. That's how long Washington had been away from home, leading this sometimes arduous task of winning the Revolutionary War. So, on December 4th, he goes to Fraunces Tavern and says goodbye to his leading officers, one by one, thanking them for their service, before getting on his horse and traveling south. And it takes him about 2.5 weeks till he gets to Annapolis, Maryland, where the Continental Congress was meeting, and Washington resigns his command and gives them his sword and says, "I'm done. You're welcome." He didn't say it like that. He was very gracious and said thank you for the opportunity. And then he finally returns home to retirement. So he thinks for about 4 years, until he's obviously called back into action. I guess he doesn't become president until 89. So about 6 years until he's called back into action. But that is the very short version of the evacuation of New York City, a momentous occasion that was celebrated in New York City for over a century. It only started being less celebrated, first of all, during the Civil War. Thanksgiving used to be proclaimed by governors kind of whenever they felt it right. New York governors would generally proclaim Thanksgiving on Evacuation Day because one of the things they were giving thanks for was winning the war. Once Abraham Lincoln comes around a little bit later and proclaims a national day of Thanksgiving, that's when Thanksgiving kind of starts to supersede Evacuation Day. And then after after the World War I starts, it's Evacuation Day celebrations, which they were a big celebration, they are kind of put aside through World War I. They come back a little bit, but then once World War II is over, there's like reconstruction done in New York City, and the places that they would celebrate were changed pretty dramatically, although there is an effort to bring back Evacuation Day celebrations now. Even more interesting is the Evacuation Day celebrations in New York City eventually led to the Evacuations Day celebrations from when the British evacuated Boston at the beginning of the war, after the siege of Boston. About 1901, Boston started celebrating also. And what's really fascinating is New York Evacuation Day is essentially on Thanksgiving. Boston's Evacuation Day is and was on St. Patrick's Day. So it just happened to coincide with holidays. I know we're a little all over the place in this particular video, but you know what? It's a celebration. I hope you and your family have a fantastic holiday. And I will be back with another founder for you tomorrow.